In a modest office at Wilton Park in Buckinghamshire, during the summer of 1945, a captured German field marshal faced a question from a British intelligence officer. This man was Gerd von Rundstedt, aged 69, still recovering from a heart attack he'd suffered during initial questioning, a career soldier who had served in 3 distinct German armies for over half a century. The interrogator sought his candid appraisal of the Atlantic Wall, the immense network of concrete defenses Rundstedt had overseen from his command post near Paris. Rundstedt offered no equivocation. The wall, he declared, was a colossal deception. While the stretch from the Scheldt to the Seine possessed genuine strength, the fortifications extending south into Brittany and towards the Spanish frontier were, in his own words, a dismal failure, essentially empty. To witness its reality in Normandy, he stated, was to see its utter inadequacy. He then added a more peculiar observation: the enemy likely possessed a greater understanding of the wall than its builders. He spoke this without resentment, having nothing to gain and being a man who did not flatter his captors. He was merely recounting his conclusions from the spring of 1944, over a year before the war's conclusion, that those tasked with breaching the wall had a clearer view than those defending it. This situation should have been inconceivable. The Atlantic Wall represented the 20th century's most ambitious defensive construction, erected by Europe's most secretive regime, guarded by the Wehrmacht and surveilled by the Gestapo. 17 million cubic meters of concrete and 1.2 million tons of steel formed its substance, with hundreds of thousands of laborers, predominantly French civilians and forced laborers under the TOT organization, toiling for 4 years to pour it into place. Yet, by the dawn of June 6, 1944, the lieutenants and sergeants landing at Vierville, Colleville, and La Rivière carried maps detailing German positions unknown even to their occupants. They knew the precise spacing of beach obstacles, the types and firing arcs of bunkers unseen by any Allied soldier, and could distinguish between genuine and decoy minefields. How a formidable barrier, stretching from the Arctic Circle to the Pyrenees, came to be more intimately understood by its adversaries than its own garrison is a narrative that has seldom been told as Rundstedt himself revealed it. It spans from a house painter on a ladder to a miniature submarine off Omaha Beach, culminating in a Buckinghamshire manor where the vanquished were quietly documented by the victors. The truly intriguing question isn't how the Allies acquired their knowledge, but why the Germans, after constructing this immense edifice, failed to truly comprehend it themselves. To grasp what Rundstedt inherited upon his appointment as Commander-in-Chief West in March 1942, one must delve into a century-old dispute within the German General Staff, a conflict concerning fortifications. The German military harbored a deep historical awareness of defensive lines. They recalled the chain of fortresses along the Rhine that proved ineffective against Napoleon. More recently, they remembered the disastrous collapse of the French Maginot Line in 1940, where Europe's densest concentration of fixed artillery positions was simply bypassed through the Ardennes forest, leaving the gun crews in their emplacements with nothing to fire upon. The lesson the German staff had extracted from these events, dating back to Helmuth von Moltke the Elder's writings in the 1860s, was stark: fixed defenses were a liability. They concentrated resources, clearly signaled the attacker's intended approach and avoidance, and rarely repelled a determined enemy with the freedom to maneuver around them. Rundstedt had internalized this doctrine throughout his life. Raised in a Prussian military household, he entered the army in 1892 and progressed through the same staff system that had produced Schlieffen and Hindenburg. By the time Hitler seized power in 1933, he was a senior general with firmly held convictions, and his views on coastal defenses aligned with the prevailing wisdom of his era. The accepted military thinking was that a serious invasion was not to be halted at a fortified line but engaged on open ground with mobile reserves and armor, after the enemy had committed their forces and before they could establish a secure beachhead. This was the established doctrine, proven effective in 2 world wars. Thus, when Hitler issued Führer Directive 40 in March 1942, mandating the construction of an unbroken defensive line from northern Norway to the Bay of Biscay, Rundstedt recognized a direct violation of this doctrine. However, with Hitler's personal signature on the directive, his ability to influence it was limited. The directive itself outlined the wall's intended purpose: to deny the enemy access to the European coast and to secure maritime approaches to protected waterways. It did not, however, propose defeating an invasion. The wall's initial objective was to impede an enemy advance, not to halt it, a distinction that Joseph Goebbels and the propaganda ministry soon began to obscure. By the spring of 1943, German newsreels depicted staged scenes for domestic audiences, showcasing imposing gun emplacements in Norway and the Pas de Calais, manned by soldiers aware of the cameras. The accompanying narration spoke of an impenetrable iron ring around what the propagandists termed Festung Europa, Fortress Europe, a bulwark no enemy could ever breach. The reality, from Rundstedt's perspective outside Paris, was far different. The wall's construction was inconsistent. The Pas de Calais sector, where the English Channel was narrowest and where every German staff officer anticipated the invasion, was genuinely formidable. Other sections, however, were largely symbolic. The infantry tasked with defending the wall comprised a peculiar mix: older German soldiers, convalescing wounded, adolescents, and what the Wehrmacht termed Astruppen. These were Soviet prisoners of war, predominantly Cossacks, Georgians, Armenians, Azerbaijanis, and Turkomans, who had either volunteered or been conscripted into German uniforms and deployed to the French coast, their rifles pointed seaward. By the close of 1943, an average of 2 Ost battalions were assigned to nearly every German coastal division. Their German officers harbored suspicions about their loyalty, and the soldiers themselves often lacked a common language with their neighboring units. In late October 1943, following extensive personal inspections along the coast, Rundstedt drafted a lengthy, candid memorandum, which he forwarded through Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel directly to Hitler. He acknowledged the Atlantic Wall's utility for propaganda and for briefly delaying an invader, but he argued forcefully that it alone could not repel an invasion. The sole prospect for a successful defense in the West, he wrote, lay in mobile armored reserves stationed inland, poised to counterattack the moment the enemy committed to a beachhead. Rundstedt was reiterating the same argument German generals had been making for a century against the allure of fixed defenses. Hitler read the report and informed Rundstedt that he concurred, only to then proceed with actions that contradicted this agreement. On November 3, 1943, he issued Führer Directive 51, appointing Field Marshal Erwin Rommel as General Inspector of Western Defenses, answerable not to Rundstedt but directly to the High Command in Berlin. Rommel arrived in France around November 10 and spent the winter conducting inspections. By mid-January 1944, he had assumed command of Army Group B, which directly controlled the Channel coast. Rommel's conclusions diverged sharply from Rundstedt's. Having endured 18 months in North Africa under relentless Allied air superiority, he believed that armored reserves could not be repositioned in daylight without succumbing to aerial attack. The invasion, Rommel asserted, had to be repelled on the beaches within the initial 24 hours, or it would be unstoppable. Hitler also agreed with Rommel. The consequence was a German command structure in the West by the spring of 1944 characterized by 2 field marshals working at cross purposes, neither possessing complete control over the troops they were meant to command, and both subject to Hitler's personal intervention on matters as minor as the placement of individual armored divisions. Rundstedt, officially the Commander-in-Chief West, in reality held no authority over the Navy under Admiral Theodor Krank or the Luftwaffe under Field Marshal Hugo Sperl within his sector. Waffen-SS units answered to Heinrich Himmler, and the organization Todt, responsible for the wall's construction, reported to Albert Speer. The OKW Reserve Panzer Divisions, the only mobile force capable of driving an invasion back into the sea, could not be deployed without Hitler's direct authorization. Rundstedt would sometimes remark with the dry humor of an elderly man with nothing left to lose that the only individual he was certain he commanded was the sentry at his headquarters' main gate. While the German command in the West was ensnared in internal conflict, those preparing to assault the wall were pursuing a different strategy, dismantling it on paper. The initial phase of this endeavor commenced in a location no German officer would have suspected. In March 1942, the British Broadcasting Corporation, in conjunction with Combined Operations Headquarters in London, broadcast an appeal to the citizens of the United Kingdom, requesting a rather peculiar item: old holiday photographs and postcards of the European coastline, from Norway to the Pyrenees, dating from before the war. The British public responded with millions of images, arriving in shoeboxes and parcels, many accompanied by handwritten annotations. A photograph of a couple on the beach at Luc-sur-Mer in 1937, a postcard of the harbor at Wimereux, a snapshot of children enjoying ice cream on the promenade at Villers-sur-Mer. Intelligence officers meticulously catalogued these by location, cross-referencing them with French maps, and gradually assembled a comprehensive visual record of every beach the Germans intended to fortify. They could ascertain the gradient of the sand, the height of seawalls, the proximity of access roads, and the presence of shingle banks. In some instances, they possessed a postcard taken from the identical vantage point later used by a German propaganda film unit to photograph a newly constructed bunker, allowing them to measure the bunker's impact on the original scene. This was, in essence, the most extensive instance of crowdsourced intelligence gathering in the history of warfare up to that point, achieved at minimal cost and entirely unknown to the Germans. While postcards were arriving in London, a more perilous form of reconnaissance was taking shape across the English Channel. In the summer of 1940, mere days after France's capitulation, Charles de Gaulle, then in London, appointed a young officer named André Douvrin, operating under the pseudonym Colonel Passy, with the mandate to establish a free French intelligence service from scratch. Douvrin possessed no prior experience, few agents, a negligible budget, and almost no equipment. His sole driving force was an unwavering conviction: the Allies would eventually return to France, and upon their arrival, they would require detailed knowledge of the coastal defenses. From his small London office, the task of gathering this crucial intelligence was delegated to a network of ordinary individuals within occupied France. The intelligence service ultimately responsible for mapping the Atlantic Wall was named Century. It functioned as the intelligence arm of a larger resistance organization, the Organisation Civile et Militaire, founded in the spring of 1942. Century's findings were relayed to London via the older network of Colonel Remy, the Confrérie Notre Dame, which possessed the wireless and courier capabilities to transmit them across the Channel. The head of Century's section in Normandy was a man named Marcel Gerd, leading a dedicated group of approximately 40 individuals. They were not soldiers but comprised sailors, fishermen, postal workers, schoolteachers, a village priest, and the wife of a hotel proprietor. They meticulously counted German troop movements, recorded guard rotations at gun emplacements, observed construction sites on their daily commutes, and tallied the steel reinforcing bars arriving on trucks. At night, they sketched their observations on the backs of newspapers, passing these crucial drawings up the chain of command by hand and by fishing boat. One particular episode within the Century network, standing alone, could fill an entire program. It involved a member named René Duchamp. Duchamp was a house painter and decorator, a jovial man in his late 30s, whose affable demeanor often disarmed German officers, rendering them dismissive. On May 7, 1942, a combination of luck and audacious courage propelled him into an act of resistance rarely replicated in the annals of wartime intelligence gathering. He had accepted a contract to repaint the interior offices of the Organisation Tote's regional headquarters in Caen, the German agency overseeing construction along the lower Normandy coast. While perched on a stepladder, feigning a discussion about wallpaper samples, an officer momentarily vacated the room. On the desk lay a rolled document. Duchamp descended, examined it, and discovered it was a master blueprint of the Atlantic Wall fortifications for the entire Cotentin sector, meticulously marking the location of every casemate, every bunker, every underwater obstacle, every minefield, and even the dummy minefields designed to mislead attackers. He seized the document, concealed it behind a mirror within the same office, and departed. Days later, he returned under the pretext of completing the job, successfully retrieved it, and the plan was transported across France. Packed with other documents, it was smuggled across the Channel by Colonel Remy himself in a small fishing vessel named Les Deux Anges, arriving in London on June 21, 1942. Remy then entered the offices of British intelligence and presented the documents on a desk. The Allied officers who examined these documents were so astonished by their contents that their immediate fear was that the Germans, upon realizing the theft, would completely alter their defensive strategy. A decision was swiftly made to replicate the stolen plan, sharing it with only the absolute minimum number of people. The enemy remained entirely unaware that their crucial blueprints were missing. Over the subsequent 2 years, the Centauri Group alone is reported to have dispatched more than 3,000 individual documents to London, all pertaining to the Atlantic Wall. This extensive network of agents spread throughout France eventually numbered in the thousands. The cost of this vital intelligence gathering was immense. Both the Centauri and the Confrérie Notre Dame network suffered severe infiltration by the Gestapo. Significant portions of both organizations were apprehended, executed, or sent to concentration camps. Duchess's wife, Odette, was arrested in November 1943 and subsequently deported to Ravensbrück the following spring. Miraculously, she survived her ordeal, returned to France, and was liberated on July 1, 1945. She lived out her days in her own home until March 2005, outliving nearly everyone who knew of her clandestine wartime actions. While the French resistance was diligently undermining the wall from within, the Royal Air Force and the United States Army Air Forces were meticulously documenting it from the skies. Reconnaissance Spitfires, stripped of their armament and protective armor to maximize their altitude and speed, conducted north-to-south flights along the coastline at altitudes beyond the reach of German fighter planes. The captured film was then transported to a repurposed manor house in Buckinghamshire, the central interpretation unit of Allied photographic intelligence. By 1944, this facility employed well over 1,500 individuals, approximately 600 of whom were skilled photographic interpreters, with women comprising more than half of this group. Working in pairs around the clock, they analyzed images using stereoscopic viewers. They could discern a genuine bunker from a wooden decoy simply by the shadow it cast at 3 in the afternoon. They could differentiate a recently constructed concrete casemate from one that had been in place for 6 months by the hue of the disturbed soil surrounding it. By the spring of 1944, they had identified, located, and categorized thousands of individual gun emplacements, firing pits, beach defenses, radar installations, and field positions along the coast. During the final months preceding the invasion, the most perilous reconnaissance missions commenced. In late 1943, a young Royal Engineers officer named Logan Scott Bowden was assigned to a small unit known as the Combined Operations Patrols. Their daring suggestions included swimming ashore at the intended invasion beaches to collect samples of the actual sand. This was a critical engineering concern. Planners needed to ascertain whether the beaches could support the weight of a 30-ton Sherman tank disembarking from a landing craft, or if the tanks would simply sink into the mud or water, becoming stationary targets for enemy artillery. Aerial photographs were incapable of providing this crucial information. There was no other reliable method to obtain a definitive answer. On the night of December 31, 1943, Scott Bowden and a Royal Marine sergeant named Bruce Ogden Smith executed the first of these clandestine missions. Swimming ashore during Operation KJH at what would become the eastern edge of Gold Beach, near Vers-sur-Mer, they successfully retrieved their samples. Then, on the night of January 17, 1944, they returned to the operations site. This time, their approach was considerably more dangerous. They were transported across the channel in a midget submarine. The X-20, a vessel measuring only 51 feet in length, was crewed for this operation by 5 men crammed into a hull roughly the size of a small bus. The commanding officer was Lieutenant Ken Hudspeth. Accompanied by Sub-Lieutenant Bruce Enzer, Cop Commander Lieutenant Commander Nigel Clogstown Wilmot, and the 2 swimmers, Scott Bowden and Ogden Smith. The X-20 delivered them to within 400 yards of what would later be designated Omaha Beach. Scott Bowden and Ogden Smith donned their swimming suits over their woolen undergarments and entered the frigid water. They moved stealthily on hands and knees in the darkness, collecting sand samples into rubber tubes, meticulously labeled by their precise location. At one critical moment, Scott Bowden, lying prone behind the shingle, looked up and observed a solitary set of footprints in the sand ahead of him. Suddenly, a torch beam swept across the rear of the beach, revealing a German sentry patrolling less than 200 yards away. He waited patiently. The sentry moved on. Scott Bowden resumed his vital task. He swam back to the waiting X-20. The submarine submerged and made its return journey. The collected samples were transported to England. They were analyzed by soil scientists working closely with the D-Day planning teams, with the crystallographer G.J.D. Bernal serving as the principal expert on beach load-bearing capacity. The findings confirmed that the designated American landing beaches were indeed capable of supporting the weight of armored vehicles. This single piece of critical information profoundly influenced the entire assault plan for what would become known as Omaha Beach. Without the vital samples retrieved by the X-20, the planners would have been forced to rely on guesswork. By the spring of 1944, all these disparate streams of intelligence were converging on a single building in St. James's Square, London, known as Norfolk House. Here, the cartographers and intelligence officers of the Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force were meticulously compiling them into a set of maps unparalleled in their detail and scope. These maps were designated Bigot maps, named after the extraordinary security classification that governed them, a classification exceeding top secret. Only a few thousand individuals across the entire Allied war effort were authorized to view them. At first glance, the maps resembled conventional topographic charts of the Normandy coastline, displaying roads, towns, contour lines, and tidal markings in standard colors. However, overlaid onto this base layer, in precisely rendered colored annotations, every scrap of intelligence the Allies had gathered was meticulously recorded. The precise location, type, and field of fire of every observed German bunker. Anti-tank ditches surrounding strongpoints. Hedgehog obstacles spaced 30 to 35 feet apart, likely mined. Drainage ditches. The depth of water at both low and high tide. The location on Omaha Beach alone of more than 200 individual obstacles, categorized and spaced. The maps were issued in multiple versions and revisions, akin to ordnance survey sheets. Surviving examples, the Omaha East and Omaha West sheets, detailing where the United States 1st Infantry Division would land in the Easy Red and Fox Green sectors below Colleyville, were drawn at a scale of 1:25,000 on base sheet 79 and 80 of the British General Staff Geographical Service series. The beach obstacle overprint editions incorporated updates as late as May 12 and May 30, 1944, mere days before the assault. This urgency was driven by a security lapse during a practice landing, Operation Tiger, off the Devon coast in late April, which resulted in the disappearance of 10 bigot-cleared officers at sea. General Eisenhower personally ordered the recovery of all 10 bodies before the invasion could proceed, unwilling to risk any of them being captured alive. The consequence of this meticulous approach was that Eisenhower's planning staff possessed a more accurate understanding of the Normandy sector of the wall than the German divisions actually tasked with its defense. German engineers received regular updates regarding new construction within their own sectors. However, they did not receive systematic, comprehensive intelligence concerning fields of fire across battalion boundaries, the blind spots between adjacent bunkers, or the exact spacing of obstacles in neighboring positions. The Allies possessed all of this consolidated on a single, continuously updated document. Through the combined efforts of the resistance, the photo interpreters, the swimmers, and the cartographers, they had constructed a unified depiction of the wall that no German general had ever managed to assemble. This is precisely what Field Marshal Rundstedt would later articulate in a British prisoner of war facility in 1944, stating with almost matter-of-fact clarity that the enemy knew his wall better than the men who had built it. He was not speaking metaphorically, he was stating a verifiable fact that he had begun to suspect long before the invasion. There are anniversaries that go unannounced and faces that are never printed in newspapers. The fishermen who navigated their small boats, the Les Douaniers, across the channel, carrying those vital documents. The young women of the resistance who sketched coastal batteries on the backs of grocery lists. The metonym photographic interpreters, predominantly women in their 20s, who spent the war in dimly lit huts, poring over black and white prints through stereoscopic viewers, signing the Official Secrets Act, and never revealing to their families what they had accomplished. None of them are featured in textbooks. Most never received a medal. To understand why the German side of the wall was in such a vastly different state compared to the Allied forces, one must examine the internal dynamics of the German command structure during the same period the Allies were assembling their comprehensive maps. The Germans were not inactive. They were not lazy. Individually, they were not less competent. They were operating within a system that was collapsing under its own inherent flaws. The primary issue was Hitler. By 1944, the dictator had assumed personal command of operational decisions in the West to an extent unimaginable in 1940. He dictated the placement of individual divisions, authorized the movement of panzer reserves, and even specified, with absurd precision, the order in which certain coastal batteries would be camouflaged. Field commanders who dared to propose alternative strategies were either ignored or removed. Rundstedt, who had already been dismissed once in 1941 following a disagreement on the Russian front, understood that another direct confrontation with Hitler would signify the end of his military career. This realization extended to everyone within his sphere of influence. Consequently, those who possessed superior knowledge chose to remain silent. The second significant problem was the bewildering fragmentation of authority. Rundstedt commanded the army in the West, but the Channel sector itself fell under Rommel's purview, and Rommel answered at times to Rundstedt and at other times circumvented him. The Kriegsmarine reported to Krenk, the Luftwaffe to Spurl, and the SS to Himmler. The organization Todt answered to Speer, while the reserve panzer divisions remained under Hitler's direct control. No single officer below the dictator himself possessed a unified overview of all the forces deployed along the coast. When General Bodo Zimmermann, the senior operations officer at Rundstedt's headquarters, compiled his post-war account for the United States Army's Foreign Military Studies program, he described his commander as deeply concerned from 1942 onwards, judging both the field forces and the fortifications to be inadequate. The third problem lay in the actual manning of the wall. Rommel's inspections in early 1944 revealed that many static infantry divisions lacked any form of transport, not even horse-drawn carts. Their ranks were filled with a motley assortment of older men, recovering wounded soldiers, and Austruppen battalions whose loyalty in a critical situation was questionable. The experienced non-commissioned officers, the very backbone of any infantry unit, had been steadily depleted year after year on the Eastern Front. Their replacements were younger and significantly less seasoned. Hans von Luck, in his later account of commanding the 21st Panzer Division, noted that the static divisions along the Channel coast were not regarded by their neighboring units as capable of repelling a serious landing. Their purpose was to absorb the initial assault, delay the enemy, and alert the inland reserves. Even the soldiers manning the wall harbored doubts about its efficacy. Now, consider these three critical weaknesses juxtaposed against the Allied operational strengths. The Allies operated under a unified command structure led by Eisenhower. They fostered inter-service cooperation that had been painstakingly forged since 1942. They possessed a singular intelligence picture, a cohesive set of maps, and a unified deception plan. They had time on their side. And crucially, they possessed something the Germans lacked entirely, a torrent of information originating from within the wall itself, smuggled out by men and women who had independently concluded that the wall must inevitably fall. While the comprehensive mapping of the wall was underway, a parallel Allied operation was in motion, designed not to pinpoint German positions but to deliberately misdirect Hitler's attention. This was known as Operation Bodyguard, and within it, Operation Fortitude South played a pivotal role. Directed from offices in southern England, Fortitude South conjured a complete fictional army group on paper. The 1st United States Army Group, comprising 11 divisions and an estimated 150,000 imaginary men, was purportedly commanded by General George Patton, who at that time was the German Army's most dreaded American officer. This phantom army was assigned encampments in Kent and Essex. Inflatable rubber tanks were strategically placed in fields where German reconnaissance aircraft could photograph them. Approximately 200,000 individuals were casualties in the Battle of the Trench. 150 dummy landing craft, both large and small, were deployed across the harbors of southeast England, from Folkestone to the Thames and the Suffolk rivers. Continuous, deliberate, and seemingly careless radio traffic was generated by signal companies transmitting messages between non-existent units. The narrative being propagated through every channel was consistent: the real invasion would target the Pas de Calais, the shortest crossing point of the channel. Anything occurring elsewhere would be a diversion. The Germans genuinely accepted this deception. They embraced it because it aligned with their strategic expectations regarding the Pas de Calais, and critically, the most comprehensive validation of this misinformation originated from a Spanish individual. This operative, known as Jorge Pujol Garcia, codenamed Garbo, was secretly employed by the British. He diligently supplied Berlin with a continuous stream of fabricated intelligence, fabricating 27 phantom units and agents solely from his imagination. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, during discussions with Wilhelm Keitel, explicitly referenced Garbo's reports. Adolf Hitler himself also cited these dispatches. The German 15th Army, comprising as many as 19 divisions, remained positioned in the Pas de Calais sector throughout the initial invasion, and for weeks afterward, anticipating an assault that would never materialize there. When the actual landings commenced on June 6, the defenders encountered an adversary already intimately familiar with the terrain. American Rangers scaling the cliffs at Point du Hoc successfully reached their objective due to months of meticulous study of aerial reconnaissance imagery. The British assault forces landing at Sword and Gold Beaches advanced along routes precisely charted by British intelligence. These vital details were obtained from resistance operatives and specialized reconnaissance swimmers from Units X-20 and X-23. Even where German resistance proved exceptionally fierce, such as at Omaha Beach, the setbacks encountered were tactical in nature, not strategic. The Allied forces were not taken by surprise by the conditions they faced. They had, in essence, already witnessed most of it. Nearly a year after the Normandy landings, the European conflict concluded. Field Marshal von Rundstedt was apprehended on May 1, 1945, in Bad Tolz, Bavaria, by soldiers of the United States 36th Infantry Division, commanded by Major General John E. Dahlquist. At 69 years old, he was in frail health, recuperating from cardiac issues. He experienced a second heart attack during his initial confinement in the United Kingdom, leading to a temporary halt in his questioning. On May 5, he was transported to the headquarters of the United States 7th Army in Augsburg, where he met Lieutenant General Alexander Patch. Subsequently, he was flown to Great Britain and initially housed at the Combined Services Detailed Interrogation Centre at Wilton Park. This former country estate in Buckinghamshire had been discreetly transformed by British intelligence into a specialised facility for debriefing high-ranking German officers, complete with concealed microphones in numerous rooms. Many of the generals held there remained unaware that their private discussions were being recorded, leading them to speak with remarkable candour. The transcripts of these uninhibited conversations, meticulously documented by British and American officers, fill thousands of pages and offer some of the most candid insights ever provided by senior German military figures regarding the war, precisely because the participants believed they were speaking in absolute privacy. Rundstedt also underwent extensive formal interrogation sessions and was later interviewed by esteemed military historians, including Basil Liddell Hart. Liddell Hart's comprehensive working notes are now preserved at the Liddell Hart Centre for Military Archives at King's College London. Liddell Hart had received official sanction from the Foreign Office to commence interviewing senior German prisoners in late January 1946. Additional interrogations were conducted by the Historical Section of the Canadian Military Headquarters, under the direction of Charles Stacey, which produced its own series of specialized reports on German commanders throughout 1945 and 1946. These two distinct sets of records, British and Canadian, occasionally intersect and sometimes diverge. Both extensively feature Rundstedt's detailed commentary on the Atlantic Wall. Within these records, the Field Marshal offered numerous pronouncements, some self-serving and others carefully crafted to safeguard the reputation of the German officer corps. However, concerning the wall itself, across numerous transcripts, his assessments were direct and consistent. He repeatedly employed a limited set of phrases, subtly varied in combination, when speaking with different interrogators on different days. He spoke of bluff, propaganda, and rubbish. He acknowledged that the necessary defenses were absent, and he delivered the most damning indictment of the entire structure, that the enemy likely possessed no more knowledge of the wall than the men who had constructed it. The question arises, why did the Allies, operating from the outside and with no direct access to the fortifications, perceive them more clearly than the Germans who had meticulously built them? The answer lies not in technical superiority but in fundamental organizational structure, stemming from a singular, crucial difference between the two systems. By 1944, the Allied nations had cultivated an intelligence culture where information flowed freely both upwards and sideways, entirely free from political manipulation. A photograph captured by a Spitfire pilot over Cannes on a Tuesday could be analyzed at Medmenham by Wednesday and integrated into a BY-God map at Norfolk House by Thursday. A sketch produced by a French resistance fisherman could reach a London office within 4 days. A sample of sand collected from the prospective Omaha beach in mid-January was undergoing laboratory analysis by the month's end. This intricate system functioned effectively because the individuals involved trusted each other implicitly to share their findings and trusted their superiors not to penalize them for uncovering unfavorable truths. The Germans, conversely, lacked any comparable system. They possessed exceptionally talented individual officers and highly skilled engineers. Their organization, TOT, could execute concrete construction with a speed and capacity that rivaled almost any other global agency. What was conspicuously absent was a culture that permitted negative information to be communicated honestly up the chain of command. An individual reporting that a section of the wall was deficient risked being branded a defeatist. A staff officer highlighting the unreliability of Ostruppen battalions risked being questioned about undermining morale. By 1944, German officers primarily reserved their truthful reports for post-war dissemination. They understood that any written documentation submitted while Hitler was alive could irrevocably damage their careers if it fell into the wrong hands. Consequently, information regarding the wall was severely fragmented within the German command structure. Each sector commander was aware of his immediate area. TOT understood construction logistics. The Kriegsmarine possessed knowledge of the gun emplacements. The infantry divisions were familiar with the troops manning the trenches. No one above divisional command possessed a unified perspective, because such a comprehensive view would have unequivocally demonstrated that the wall, as a whole, was fundamentally flawed. The Allies, by contrast, operating from the outside, faced no such constraints. They actively sought the truth and established systems specifically designed to uncover it. And they succeeded. A specific type of document exists within the British and Canadian archives, at the Royal Air Force Museum in Hendon, and at the Liddell Hart Centre at King's College London. These are often faded carbon copies, essentially interrogation transcripts where the Field Marshal is questioned about the Allied air operations concerning Overlord. His responses are weary. He concedes that German forces were poorly equipped and disorganized on D-Day. He admits the wall was a deception. He acknowledges that the enemy was aware of this. These are among the understated documents of the Second World War, absent from the 1945 newsreels and omitted from the standard memoirs later published by German generals in West Germany during the 1950s, which often presented a more dignified narrative of the war. Yet, they are present, filed away, a testament to what these men truly said when the cameras were off. This provides the ultimate answer to the question that initiated this entire inquiry: how did a defensive fortification stretching from the Arctic Circle to the Pyrenees, manned by hundreds of thousands of soldiers, become better understood by its adversaries than by its own defenders? It was not a matter of superior enemy intellect, rather, it was a consequence of a greater willingness to observe. The Allies examined the Atlantic Wall from every conceivable vantage point. They deployed swimmers, photographers, and even artists equipped with fabricated wallpaper samples. They solicited old holiday snapshots from their own civilian population. They meticulously assembled a cohesive picture, continuously updating it. The Germans, meanwhile, constructed a formidable physical barrier, but failed to cultivate a culture capable of perceiving its overall weaknesses. By the time Rundstedt confessed the truth in a subdued British interrogation room in 1945, that truth had been evident for 2 years to anyone possessing BY-God clearance and a desk lamp. Rundstedt himself emerges as a more complex figure than the simplistic villain often portrayed in post-war recollections. He was a Prussian aristocrat who had served 3 German emperors and a Führer. He harbored deep distrust of Hitler from the outset, yet continued to serve him. He provided testimony at Nuremberg on matters he should have had no knowledge of, unconvincingly attempting to disclaim responsibility. Following his interrogation period, he was held in British custody in Germany, awaiting potential war crimes charges. He was formally charged on January 1, 1949, declared medically unfit to stand trial in May, and subsequently released later that same month. He relocated to Hanover with his wife, Bella. She suffered a stroke in January 1952 and passed away in October. Rundstedt himself died on February 24, 1953, at the age of 77. In his final years, former comrades, including General Günther Blumentritt, organized fundraising efforts to cover his nursing care expenses. Beyond his military campaigns and the captured photographs, his enduring legacy is a single, profound statement: the enemy had probably no more about the Atlantic Wall than the men who built it. He uttered this in private, during interrogations, and repeated it more than once to different interrogators across 1945 and 1946. It was not an accidental remark but, by the end, his considered opinion. The individuals who validated his assessment are not prominently featured in historical textbooks. Logan Scott Bowden survived the war and lived a long life, occasionally delivering lectures on postage stamps to small, largely unfamiliar audiences. Bruce Ogden Smith continued his service in the Royal Marines. André de Vaudrin and Colonel Passy returned to quiet civilian lives in post-war France. Marcel Girard maintained contact with the surviving members of his network through a modest annual reunion for decades. René Duches, the painter from Cannes who absconded from a TOT office with a roll of fortification plans concealed behind a mirror, succumbed in April 1948 at the age of 45, his health broken by years of stress and clandestine operations. A street in Cannes, near the Rue Colonel Remy in the district surrounding the Port-Lopé Memorial, now bears his name. His wife, Odette, who had been deported in his stead, returned home and outlived him by over half a century. At Medmenham, more than 1,000 men and women passed through the photographic interpretation huts during the war. The vast majority of these interpreters were women. Their names, if they appear at all, are found on a single bronze plaque at Danesfield House. They had signed the Official Secrets Act, and its terms persisted long after the war's conclusion. Some resided in the area into the 1990s, sharing Sunday lunches with their grandchildren, their families never fully comprehending the extraordinary contributions they had made in their youth. Across France, significant portions of the Sentinelle and Confrérie Notre Dame networks were dismantled by the Gestapo before the war's end. Among the casualties were fishermen from Normandy ports whose names are recorded in dusty municipal registries and nowhere else. The Atlantic Wall, the very structure they all worked against, still stands in fragmented sections along the coastlines where they fought it. Some portions have succumbed to the sea, others have been swallowed by sand dunes, and some are preserved as memorials, particularly at the Tot battery near Cap Gris and at Lons-sur-Mer in Normandy, where 4 casemates and their original guns remain visible. The bunkers are silent now. School buses arrive, and children walk through the casemates, gazing out through the firing slits at the grey waters of the Channel, the same waters that, on the morning of June 6, 1944, suddenly teemed with countless vessels. The narrative that began in a small office at Wilton Park concludes in the same location, with an aging field marshal, a British interrogator, and a stark, unvarnished sentence. Rundstedt knew, even before the invasion occurred, that he was confronting a fortification his adversary had already meticulously mapped in colored ink on a case map kept in a steel cabinet in St. James's Square. He could not voice this truth while Hitler was alive. He spoke it later, when he had nothing left to lose. The conclusion of the war was an immensely challenging period. The enemy had likely known more about the wall than the men who constructed it. He did not speak with bitterness, according to those who heard him, he was simply weary. He had served as a soldier for 52 years, witnessing the rise and fall of 3 German regimes. He had spent the final years of his career commanding a wall he did not believe in, facing an adversary who could see what he could not. He admitted this truth because, in the quiet, sterile room in Buckinghamshire where the war had ultimately ended for him, there was no longer any reason to conceal it.